All right, and welcome to another FileMaker video on how to implement preferences into your FileMaker solution. Um, I just want to throw this disclaimer out here at the very beginning. I'm not uh, I'm not a FileMaker developer by trade. I'm not some guru. I'm just some guy that used it quite a bit in the past and came up with my own tips and tricks, and for the most part they work. But that being said, there's almost always different ways of accomplishing the same things. And I would not be surprised if there's maybe much better ways of accomplishing these same things. But in this video, I'm going to kind of talk you through at least how I would handle dealing with settings within my app, or preferences, as I call them. The idea behind a preference is basically you want your app to work a certain way, but you want your users to be able to make selections within the app, and that changes how the app works. There's always a need for this. One example would be, if you are capturing, temperature values, and you might want a user to be able to select to display temperature values in Fahrenheit or Celsius, so they could choose which one, and it would display in that way. Other reasons why you might want preferences is you might be doing, say, a time tracking app, and that time tracking app might be capturing when a user starts doing work, and then also captures when a user finishes doing work and gives you a total. You may have seen something similar to that in my other video on capturing job entry data and time clock data. Well, in that particular case, you may want to maybe add a rounding calculation to your capture of that times, to where if that user, maybe you're billing against this time and you bill, by the quarter hour. So when they hit stop on that work item that they're working on, and if it is, 10:58, you may want that to go ahead and round up to 11, or to the nearest quarter hour, so that you don't have to do that kind of calculation later. You may have certain guidelines within your organization that you want followed, but you may have other situations where you don't want it to round. So that's a great use for a preference. So I'm just going to kind of give you some basics on how I would implement those, kind of get you started in that idea. Okay, so what I've done here is I just kind of laid out a couple of different options that I've used in the past. You may have seen in my other video, we went through the process of creating a very basic login solution. And this login solution has two different tables. It has a table for login and a table for users. Okay, I've also got a layout within the users, I believe it's within the users table, that shows, yes, you successfully logged in. So it's basically where you would take that user when the login is successful. But in that particular solution, we're going to add to that solution and figure out some preferences. Okay, so one option would be to add a separate layout to the login. Okay, so the login, you would have two layouts then underneath the login. You would have a layout for the login that we just saw, which was this one. And then you would also have a layout where preferences are stored. Okay, those would be basically application level preferences that apply to every user. Okay, and we would just store those within that layout. you could set those settings and then we could refer back to those later. Okay. Another option would be to, within the users table, we have a layout for user info, their name, their login, etc. You may want to store a bunch of different data about your individual users, but you could create a separate layout within there and store preferences that are specific to that user. So that's one option that I've used in the past. The other option that I've used in the past is I have my login and I have my layout for my login. And then once they pass that layout for the login, once they actually click that login button and they're successful, it leaves this table completely, takes them to another table for the app. Maybe you could call it main, I don't know, whatever you want to call that particular table. And then there are multiple screens within that table. And that one of those might be, say, your main screen. Maybe it shows your logo. Maybe it shows a bunch of buttons that are navigation options to go enter time or to go do this or to go do that. But that might be your navigation screen. You might have any number of layouts there. But one of those layouts that you have there would be application level preferences, where we would store preferences that count at an application level. Okay. Then at the users, you would do the same as you did over here. You could have a separate layout just for user specific preferences. Now, both these options assume that you need both. It assumes that you need application level preferences and you also need user level preferences. If you don't need user specific preferences, I mean, you can just kind of ignore the second part of what we're talking about here and either store them at an app level or store them at the login level. Lots of different ways you can do that. Okay. For the sake of this, since these two options are very similar, we're going to work through option one here. Just kind of show you what that might look like. Okay, so the first thing I need is I need a layout for my preferences at the login table. So what I do is I come over here to this login table and I'm just going to create a new layout. Typically, I started using FileMaker years and years and years ago before some of the niceties were added in there. So I got used to doing things a certain way. So I just switch over to browse mode, or I'm sorry, layout mode, and then say duplicate the layout. Now I get a layout called login copy. And then I can go to layout setup and I can give that a proper name. So I'm going to call this, I'm just going to call this app preferences. Okay, and I'm showing records from login because that's where we're going to store the data. Okay, and voila, now I have a layout. Okay, I can go ahead and get rid of some of this stuff I don't really need. I'm going to leave one of these global fields here because I'm probably going to reuse it. I'm going to get rid of this login button. I'm going to go ahead and change this just to protect myself as we go into a button called exit preferences. And basically what I'm going to have that do is I'm going to have it go back to the login screen. So I can just do a single step, go to layout, choose my layout, which is my login screen. Okay. Login, animation none, cool. Everything looks good. I click OK. So it's going to do that for me. Also, make some changes to where you know what layout you're working with. So I'm just going to call this app preferences in case we're in a scenario where I can't see this information up here. I can know what screen we're looking at right here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and create a value, like a preference that we can use here. Okay. For the sake of this particular example, I'm just going to do a real basic preference of um, you know rounding time, like I mentioned. Like say it's on time entry. What do you want to do? Do you want to round that time or not? So what I might do here is I go to my database within my login, okay, and I would do myself a preference, okay. You might want to store these um, in such a way that you can always get back to them and know what the fields are. Like you could uh, preface them with like a P, or whatever works for you, whatever naming structure. But sometimes I'll just do P, so I know it's a preference. And then I'm going to go just rounding, so that I know if it's a rounding thing or not. And for this particular thing, I'm going to give the ability for the user to choose multiple items. So I'm just going to leave it text for right now. Okay, so there is my field that it made for me. All right. I'm just going to give it two different options right now. So what I would do here is I would just switch this to a drop-down list. In fact, a pop-up menu might be better. And create a value list. My value list is going to be rounding options. And the two options I'm going to have don't round, quarter hour. Those are going to be my two options within there, but you can see that you could just add multiples in there and just keep adding some complexity to your app. So I've got that. So now if I go back to browse mode, I can test that, and it can be set to don't round or quarter hour. Okay. Now let's talk about how this is going to work. This is my login. Okay, and my login is only really ever going to have a single record in this table. Okay, and that is on purpose so that I can create some static references back to that record and always be able to read my preferences. Your app might be the same way. Your users is going to be different. You're going to have to look back through a relationship using the user ID to get to their specific preferences, but we'll talk about that in a second. So one trick that I learned many years ago that I just found myself using a lot was this real basic trick, and then again with variables and so forth. There's lots of better ways to do this now, but I'm going to show you what I used to do. So what I would do is I would create a field, and in this particular case, I'm just going to call it relate all. Okay, and I'm going to make it a a number, and whenever I create it, I'm going to go to options, and I'm going to give it the storage of global. There we go. In fact, I don't want to do that after all. Okay, here's a quick lesson about globals. Globals are specific to the user that is logging in. So if you have a user coming in, connecting to your solution from one place, they will see their set of globals, and if they change a global value, it changes for them everywhere in the app, but it doesn't change for other users. I want something that's going to stay static, so I'm going to go ahead and take that global off. and I'm going to go ahead and do an auto enter with a data of 1, because I always want this thing to be there, and I always want this thing to have a predictable value in it. Okay, so I'm just going to put this up here. Now, why doesn't it have a value now? Well, because the record already existed here. Okay, but if I create a new record, now it has it. Okay, and then if I go back to the previous record, I can just delete that previous record. So now I've got a relate all, and if I made new records, they would have it. But I want to ensure that I only ever keep one record here, and that will be the app preferences. Okay, and it's fitting that it's within the login screen. It could also be in the app, as long as you can maintain that it's just a single place to look up to. But in the login, it makes sense to me because I'm going to reuse that over and over and over. All right, so here's what I want, is I want to set this to quarter hour, and I want to exit the preferences. So now I've got preferences set at an app level. Okay. For the sake of this, I am going to go ahead and create my main application, meaning another table for that. So I will go to my tables, and I'm just going to create one called app. So app is going to be where I send people whenever they successfully log in. So this will be my main app. Okay, and then if I go to my layouts here, what I can do is I can go to layout. Okay, I can duplicate this layout and then do a setup on this layout, and I can tell it to show me records from the app table. And I'm just going to call this main or menu. Menu is even better. Maybe this is a selection menu where they can click a bunch of things to start working on. All right, so that's what this one's called, and this is my menu. I don't need a login button. I will need a button that takes me back to my login, basically exits the application. So let's work on that now before we get too far. Okay, and it's going to do an exit script right now is what it's set to do. Now my exit script from my last video, you may or may not remember, really all it did was take me to, we'll go in there and take a look at it. My exit script was just a way of getting out of my startup script situation. In the first app video, I showed that you might want to create a startup script. The startup script is something that runs when the app first starts up. And in this particular example, what I chose to do is hide the toolbars. Okay, and then go to a certain layout. And then I gave another button, the exit script, that would show the toolbars. That way you don't get yourself locked into a situation while you're developing your app. Okay, but eventually you may want that to actually do something. Okay, but I'm basically going to disable this for right now. So I'm just going to remove this step. So now my startup just takes me to that screen, to the login screen. Okay. I can also use that script within my application to take this user back to that screen as well. So that's what I do is I go to exit app, or I'll just call it exit, and it's the exit script, which is all well and good. Here's the main menu, just for the sake of, as we're building, that we can tell what we're looking at. I'm going to be I'm going to create a couple extra buttons here that don't really do anything just yet. Enter time. Okay, so that would be one button. Maybe that's one thing that your employees are able to do once they're in the app. Another thing they might be able to do is maybe you're going to ask them to request PTO through this app. So you got a couple of different things. Now I'm going to go ahead and set these to do nothing right at the moment. But we can now, when we're looking at this, see a difference in this screen. So what we've got is we've got this exit button. Okay, and the exit performs a script, exit script. Okay, and let's take a look at that because something's not working about it. So the exit script, oh, that's because all it does is show and hide. So what we want is the startup script. Okay, so that it will take us back. You could create a separate script if you want, but we just want it to take us back to the login. So in this particular case, I'm going to do startup script because I know that one takes me back to that particular screen. All right, and then when we run this, it takes us back to our login. Okay, so again, recap real quick. We've got login. We also made an app preferences screen. Okay, and then we made a menu. Okay, what we haven't addressed though is how does the user get to this this app preferences screen? Well, we're just going to create a basic button for it. Okay, but if you wanted to, you could get a little fancier, and I'll show you kind of an example of that. But for right now, what we're going to do is on the login screen, I'm just going to make a new button. So it's going to be preferences. It's going to be a single step because I haven't built any scripts that do anything for this just yet, but you will definitely want to. And then app preferences. Okay, so that button then takes me over there to that screen. So let's try that. I'm here at the login. If I want to go set my preferences, I can. If I want to exit the preferences, great. It takes me back here. If I do a login, I need to set my login to take me to that menu screen. So let's go look at our script for login. And this is the script we worked on in the basic login video. But basically, just to recap, what we've got going on here is we're showing a dialog, enter the login and password. If the password is blank, then reset the globals, meaning clear them out, and then exit the script. If the password is blank, clear out the globals, exit the script. But if the username equals a username in the users table, and if the login that they provided equals the password in the users table, okay, then what we want to do is perform script reset globals, which is going to clear out my globals, but then the next thing it's going to do is go to layout logged in. So if I change this to layout and take them over to menu instead of that, cool. It's now going to take us to the menu screen. Now else would be if the password doesn't match, it goes to show custom dialog, hey, your password is wrong. And then else would be meaning if the username didn't match, then it would basically do the same thing, only tell them there's not a matching username. So it's a real basic script. You're going to want to add a few more error checks and so forth to yours, but that will get us working. So we close out of there, save all of our scripts. Now when we do a login, if I remember, I have a user called bsmith, and I believe his password was 2222. There we go. It takes us to the menu. Once we're in the menu, we can do some things after we set it up, or we can click exit. It takes us back, and then we are then prompted to log in again. Okay, so that is a quick way of doing this. Let's do this, bsmith 2222. Takes us over there. Cool. Again, these buttons would be things that you would do later if you're going to use your menu as a way for the user to get into the app and then choose one of many things to do while they're in there. Okay. So let's talk about the preferences themselves. We need to be able to load up preferences. And what I mean by load up preferences is, or be able to at least access those preferences. So we've got some app user preferences. We have one, in fact. And that one, just to remind you, is this rounding to a quarter hour. So I just need to know, once this user has logged in and they go to do something, I just need to know that it's going to work correctly. So how can I build that without getting too deep in the weeds? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back over here to this menu, and I'm going to create a dummy script and attach this enter time. Okay, and what my dummy script is going to do is it's going to go, hey, I'm pretending to enter time, but I'm going to enter it using this preference, and I'm going to have it repeat back to me what the preference is set to so that I know that it's doing it correctly. Now, the one thing that I have to have in order to do this is I have to have a way to get back to and see that preference. And this is where that relate all comes in. You remember that whenever I was looking at fields under the login, I created an item called relate all. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing here under menu. So under menu, which is in the table app, okay, I'm going to create an item called relate all, and it's going to be a number. And I'm going to do options, and I'm going to have it auto enter a value of 1. Okay, very good. There's my relate all. I'm going to leave it visible for now, but this is a field that you'll probably want to hide once you get going with your app. So right now, because I just added it, and because I have 0 records, okay, I need to create a record for us to land on. Now I could either do that as part of the login, create a record, okay, or I could just create a record right now. So that's what I'm going to do right now. So I create a record, and now I've got a 1. So now I can create a relationship that looks back from the app table to the login table and looks into the preferences and can actually read from that table. So let's do that. Okay, and if I go to database, relationships, here's my app. So basically what I want to do is I want to create a new relationship, and I want to go from the app table to the login table. And my relationship is valid if relate all equals relate all. So I add that relationship. I don't need to enable any of this because I don't necessarily need this relationship to be able to create records in either place. I'm just reading data. So that's all I need to do there. Okay. And if you want to arrange your stuff as you go to where it's nice and neat and easy to understand, feel free. So now what I'm going to do is create my dummy script. And here's where my dummy script is going to work. So I'm going to create a new script. And this script is going to be, I'm going to call it enter time. Okay. The first thing that I want to do in enter time is I want to look back. Well, I mean, there's a bunch of things that we might want to do. But for the sake of this sample, all I really want to do is communicate to you when that button is clicked that this is where I would run. I'm not sure why I did a folder. I don't want a folder. Sorry. 1 second. All right. What I would want to do is create a new script. Kind of losing my train of thought, what I was going to explain. So what I want to do is I just want to create a new script, and the new script is basically going to go, hey, user is entering time. Here's the preference that will be used. And it can just be a dialog box. So let's go to scripts. Okay. And if I do new, I do a new script. I'm just going to call this enter time. And like I said, I'm just going to make it really, really simple here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use a variable, and I'm going to set that variable. I'm going to say, okay, the name of my variable is going to be rounding. Okay, and the value, how do I fill that? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look back through that relationship that I made with login. And I am going to get the value of the P rounding. Okay, there we go. So there's my variable. I have set the variable using that relationship, and that relationship is using the relate all. And then I am just going to show a dialog so that I can show that it's working. User entering time. When entering time, the following preference will be used. Okay, so that's my text so far. I find it easiest to go to the specify, and then I get sort of a calculation screen. This makes more sense in my head. So I'm going to add quotes. And then what I'm going to do is add an ampersand. And I want to use that value that says rounding, that variable. Let's see what this does. So it should enter this text and then fill in that value. It says okay, everything's great. Okay, so I've saved that. I do a save and close out of here, and now I need to attach it to that button. So I'm going to perform script. The script item I'm going to perform is this enter time. And now when I click it, it says when entering time, the following preference will be used, quarter hour. Okay. Now, if I exit and I go to my preferences and I set this to don't round, exit my preferences, re-log in as B. Smith, then when I enter time, when entering time, the following preference will be used, don't round. Okay, so that kind of gave us an intro into setting up some preferences and how you might call on those preferences. Okay, you would call on those preferences because you have a record that will relate you right back to the proper record where those preferences are stored. As you're writing your scripts for your functionality that does things, you will refer to that and you will build that in and do your preferences that way. So yeah, that is a example of how to use that. So what we've shown here is we've kind of shown this half of the equation. Okay, let's talk about this half real quick. Okay, this half is going to be very similar. What I want to do is I want to create a global first and foremost. And this global is going to be application level global. And I could even store this someplace, but let's just go back to, let's exit out of here. Let's go to login, and I'm just going to make myself a field. And I'm going to call this user ID. So I'm in the login, and so user ID, my user ID is a number. Okay, so I just need to make sure my type is the same. So I'm gonna add a G because that's what I like to do to remind myself that it's a global, and I want to make sure that it's a number. And I create it. I go here and I tell it to use global storage, one value for all records. Okay. So now I have a user ID. I'll show you how this works. In my login script now, what I need to do as part of my login script, I need to do some checking, okay? But somewhere in here, I need to go ahead and set that global. Well, probably the best place to do that is once this has validated that the username and password are correct. So this is going to take me to the menu app. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add one little step in here first. I'm going to say go to layout. In fact, I don't really even need to go to the layout because I'm already there. So I'm just going to take that off. At this point, I haven't gone to this new layout. So in between these two steps, I'm already where I need to be. So what I want to do is I want to set this field. Okay. So I want to set field, the one that I just created called GUserID. And I want it to be the user ID from the user table. Okay. So one little step at a time. Let's see how this works. Whenever I go to log in, took me to the main screen, but if I were to navigate back manually, my user ID is not filled in, so that did not work. So let's check that out. Let's see. Oh, and this is why. Because I ran this reset globals, which cleared out my globals, so therefore wiped out the relationship. So I just want to do this step before I reset those globals. That should fix this. Okay, so when I do a bsmith, okay, and if I navigate back manually, you'll see that I have a user ID. If I go to users, you'll see that bsmith is user 101. Okay, so I now have this user ID, and it's a global. When I finish my login, what I could do is here it takes me to that screen, right? So what I could do is there's a number of ways you could do this. This may not even be all that necessary, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my app and I'm going to do G user ID. That way at the app table level, it knows who's logged in. And I'll set that to be a global. Okay. If I go back to app, which I called menu, I want an extra field here. Probably going to end up hiding this anyway, so I don't really care. And then I want to make one final change to this. So I'm going to use this set field after we go to that screen. So I'm going to duplicate that step and drag it down here. And so then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set app guser_id to be users user ID. Actually, probably my better thing to do would be to set it to be the login value, which is guser_id from the login screen. Okay, so let's save that. Let's give it a try. So I do a login, I do bsmith. So I've got 101 listed here. That's good. So I know that user 101 is logged in. My enter time still looks back at the main preferences. So now what I want to do is I want to call on something that is a preference at the user level. So here's what I'm going to do. I need a way to do that. So I'm going to go back to users. Okay. I could create a whole new layout like I showed in this diagram. Or I could just create a field on here, which is what I'm going to do. So on users, I'm going to create a field and I'm going to call this type. Like what type of employee is this? Okay, so this could be type, this could be any number of preferences, whatever you decide to call them. It could be on a different layout, whatever. It's just within this this area. So I'm going to do a pop-up menu here, and I'm going to make a new list, and I'm going to call this employee type. And I'm just going to have two choices right now, hourly and salary. Okay, and I just say okay. And so then when you're entering in a new employee, you just say whether or not they're hourly or salary. Okay, so here's where we're at. We now have a login. The login will retrieve and store our user ID. And that's really all we need, is we need the user ID to where we can create a relationship back to the correct user record. And we have everything we need right here. So let's create that established relationship. I go to my relationship panel, and I'm going to go from the app table, and I'm going to use that G user ID, and I'm going to go to users, and I'm going to use their user ID. So I'm basically saying this relationship is valid if these match. Okay, there cannot be more than one relational path between two tables with the same name. So so another occurrence has to be added. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll come up with a naming structure that makes sense to me. So, but you probably have one that makes sense to you, but like I might do like app to users by ID, something like that. And then now I have a separate occurrence in my relationship table. All right, and then what I'm going to do is sort of like I did with this enter time. I'm going to create a dummy script for PTO as if they're requesting PTO. So I'm going to go to enter time. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this and rename it. Request PTO. So I'm going to set a variable, and my variable is going to be, in this particular case, it's going to be a new variable called type. And the value, I'm going to get that by going through that relationship I just did and pull back the type. I didn't have I had some extra stuff in there, so let me zero that out. There we go. Okay, so that's going to set this variable with that. Okay, and then I'm going to do custom dialog. In this particular case, the user is entering a PTO request. Okay, it's mad because it wants. So, and then my calculation for this is going to be I'm just going to use a similar verbiage here. When entering a PTO request, the following employee type will be used. And I just need this to be the correct variable, which is called type. Now, for those who are questioning how I'm doing this, you're right to question it because there's a million ways to do everything. I could have skipped the variable altogether and right here just said, it'll be, I want you to show this text and type, and that would work too. In fact, I'll go ahead and leave it like this to where you can see that that will work too. in which case I don't need this variable at all. I'll just delete that step. I'll save this script. Now that I have that script, I'll come back to this and I'll assign that dummy script to this button. All right. And if I go to exit, let's just start over. I'm going to go B Smith. It's going to populate my user ID. Okay, my user ID is 101. So whenever I do request PTO, it should look back through the relationship established by 101. And we'll test this here in a moment. And return the correct thing. So here we go. When entering a PTO request, the following employee will be used. The following employee type will be used, hourly. Great. Looks like it worked. Let's test it though. Let's go back to users. And under users, let's just create a brand new user. Okay. And this one is going to be first name Bob, last name Thompson. And so it's B Thompson instead of B Smith. And I'm just going to do 5454 as the password. The type on this one will be salary. Okay. So now we go back to login. We do need to fix this. Like after it did its thing, it didn't clear out this variable. So we probably need to fix that. But let's just see how our thing is working. So if I do B Thompson, 5454, you'll notice that it now says 102. And if I request PTO, it says salary. So it was able to successfully read from that employee record and get the preferences that are specific to that employee. And that's important because once you have that bit of information that Bob Thompson is salary, you may have two different screens that you take users to request PTO, and one looks one way because they are hourly and the other looks another way. Or you might just have calculations that work differently based upon hourly versus salary. But this will allow you to do that. Okay, so let's just do some cleanup real quick before we wrap up. So we had this user ID. It's really just here so that we can see that when we did a login, it was able to pull the correct user ID over. So let's take a look at that. So this is going to be our login. And here we did set field, user ID. Okay. And then we went over here and we set this. So now that we know this is working, I don't really need to set a field. I could just use a variable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do set variable, and I'm going to call this G okay, on variables you start it with a $sign. If you do a single $sign, it will be a variable that's only good within the script. If you do two $signs, then this variable is good within the entire file. All of our tables are in the same file, so that's good. So I'm going to do this, and I'm going to call it user ID. Okay, and the value, I'm going to get it the same way as I got this. So I'm basically just going to look back at the users table and get that user ID. Okay, and as I go, I always like to test. So I can always test stuff. I can throw a custom dialog in there to make sure that it worked. But let's just go through this. Perform script reset global. So then it would clear out globals that I have on the screen. Then I have go to layout, and then I have set field app guser ID with the login guser ID. Well, I'm not going to use that anymore because I'm getting rid of that field. So here, I'm going to set it with the, did I call it user ID? I did. So I'm just going to use that variable because I know it's already loaded up. Okay. Reset global, show custom. Okay, cool. So let's save this, see how it works. In theory, I shouldn't need this anymore. So I'm going to delete that. And I'm going to do my login again. Now, this time I'm going to do bsmith because I want it to show 101 as the user ID. When I get over there, I have 101. Okay. If I exit and I log in and I use B Thompson, now I have 102. So I made that work without ever using that field. So now that field is not something that I have to clean up. You could do the same thing here. When I learned FileMaker, variables were not part of FileMaker, so I incorporate them when I can now. But sometimes I get a little paranoid and I still feel better about having a global, even if I hide it on a screen, that will have that information in it. And so one way that you can hide it is you can set the field to have no border. You can set the text to be the same as the background color, and you can set it to only be available in find mode. So that's one way to do it. But I might just keep that right there for right now. But okay, so let's revisit what we've learned. So what we did is we created a preferences. Now this preferences takes us to a layout within the application itself. These are application level preferences. Okay. This particular one that I did, if you go and switch to layout and look at the layout setup, I chose to keep it at the login, but you could certainly store that at the application if you want it. That would be an example of this second option that I showed you. But I built it basically like this. This layout, even though it's called app preferences, it's within the login table. And we set up a preference. We only set up one, and this relate all is another thing that you might hide. You don't ever need to see that again. Any record that's created from now on, which you should only ever have one, it should definitely always be one so that you can get back. And then I have a preference here called rounding. I might label this differently or whatever, but I mean, one way of doing that would be, maybe describe it a little bit better. Or categorize by the type of preference that it is. So one way to do that, I've done this before, is I just kind of use plain language here. When entering time, use the following rounding option. Okay, something like that. Sometimes it's tricky just to figure out your verbiage that you're going to use to where it's not confusing to the end user. But you could do something like that. You could also categorize into the types of things that they are. But this is what we set up. Don't round or quarter hour. Okay, so this is going to be the same. I should probably just show you that. This is going to be the same. So if I log in as bsmith, and for bsmith, my password is 2222, and I do enter time, it's going to say don't round. That's going to be the same if I go bthompson. Don't round. Okay. Whereas the user specific preference that I set for bsmith, which was this request PTO, it reads directly from his user record to figure out what type of employee he is, and it says, oh, he's an hourly employee. Whereas if I logged in with bthompson and request PTO, it says he's a salary. So yes, we set up the preferences, but these are application level preferences, meaning whatever you set here, it applies to all users, all employees, all users in your system that you set up. We also set up, we don't have a navigation straight to it, but we also set up a way that within the user's record itself, you could set certain things that are preferences specific to this user. Now, there's a downside to that. The downside is if you create a user and you forget to set this field, something may not work correctly. Maybe you want to put an if-then statement in your logic to where, hey, if this field is blank, then you always do it this way. But it's going to look back here, and it's going to get the value to decide what it wants to do. Now, you could do the rounding thing here too. You could do it in either place, but if you wanted it to be one particular employee rounds to the nearest quarter hour whenever they enter time, and another employee shows the exact value, well, you could do that. You could put the preference here and read it, and then whenever you build your script over here on your menu for entering time, you could just set that script to look over at the user record instead of the login preferences. So that's kind of what we did here. We showed you how to add some preferences that we're calling application level preferences. And you could add them at the layout, or you could add them on a layout within the app. You could add them anywhere you want, but they're going to be someplace where your relate all will get you back to the exact record that you want. Okay, and then you have user level preferences that will be stored at the user record, and you get to those users using the user ID. So those two different ways that you can handle user preferences. As you can probably imagine, there are a million different ways that you can use this. And it starts to get more and more handy as your solution develops. But that is a quick look at implementing some settings or preferences, if you would rather call it that, into your solution. Hope this was helpful. Definitely leave me some comments and let me know what questions you might have about this, or if there's something similar to this that you would like to see, see me walk through in a future video. Something that maybe would make your life easier or help your solution along. Maybe I can show you a quick demo of how I might do that. Until next time, thank you very much.